Making The Devil Wears Prada in its sequel was an absolute nightmare for one clear reason. Meryl Streep's character is based on a real person, who is much worse than the fictional villain. During filming, this woman drove the crew crazy. The entire cast had to undergo a strict diet to lose weight, and the producers ran out of money. If you like the movie and want to know why it took so many years to make a sequel, I recommend putting this video on your TV and getting comfortable. This is the story of a satire made under the shadow of a figure who was willing to destroy all of Hollywood just to get the movie canceled before its release. Before the movie, The Devil Wears Prada began as a novel by Lauren Weisberger, based on one of her biggest traumas. Weisberger was 22 years old when she got a job at Vogue as Anna Wintour's assistant. A native of England, Wintour has been the editor-in-chief of Vogue since 1988. Her vision and demanding nature made her a key figure in the fashion world. Her gaze could crown careers or destroy them. With a level of power that was hard to match, her reputation made her as influential as she was feared, especially among her assistants, who often preferred to quit rather than endure the pressure of working under the magnate. Weisberger lasted only 10 months in the position. On her very first day, Wintour criticized her hair and sent her to a stylist, and that wasn't even close to the worst of it. Just like Andy, Lauren had to tolerate endless workdays, demands that bordered on immoral and constant belittling. The assistant ran, obeyed, and pushed herself to the limit, but nothing was ever enough. After resigning, Weisberger tried to forget the experience, but she couldn't. She had nightmares where Wintour continued to criticize and make demands. One sleepless night, she channeled her trauma through writing, and without even realizing it, she completed The Devil Wears Prada a few months later. The story centers on Andrea, a recent college graduate who gets a job at Runway, the most important fashion magazine in the world. Her task is to be the junior assistant to Miranda Priestley, an editor-in-chief who is as elegant as she is fierce. While trying to satisfy her boss's directives, Andy's personal life begins to fall apart. As she shaped her nocturnal nightmares into a novel, Weisberger thought it had the potential to be a movie. After having survived the dark offices of Vogue, rejection no longer seemed so terrible. If she had survived Wintour, she could survive Hollywood executives. Weisberger printed the first 100 pages of her project and distributed them among the major studios. The writer had nothing to lose and simply hoped the responses wouldn't be as hostile as her former boss's treatment. But the exact opposite happened. Soon, a bidding war broke out. Surprised, Weisberger hurried and chose 20th Century Fox to sell the rights to her story. It was 2003, and the executives saw Miranda as one of the great new villains of pop culture. What they didn't see was the looming problem. The woman who inspired her was still out there, and she was more than capable of ruining the project. Before the novel even hit the shelves, The Devil Wears Prada already had one foot in Hollywood. But who would dare to direct a film inspired by Wintour? That was the exact question David Frankel asked himself when Fox offered him the project. He knew it was his big break. Up until then, he had only directed one feature film and episodes of series like Sex and the City. Even so, he turned down the proposal and soon learned that several other directors had done the same. The reasons were clear. Movies about fashion rarely worked, and furthermore, this wasn't just any story. It was a satire about someone with real power, someone who could sink the movie and destroy careers, and not just in the fashion world. Faced with so many rejections, the executives began to despair and insisted on Frankel. Not wanting to be disrespectful, he agreed to a meeting at the Fox offices. When the day came, he told them the story should be a satire, not a romance, and that he didn't like the main character's arcs. He felt that in the book, Miranda was just a witch, and Andy only wanted to get revenge on her. He believed the plot needed to be more than that. He then suggested that Miranda could be a covert hero, whose only goal was to push Andy to mature. Frankel thought those words had offended Fox, and that they would never call him again. Not for this or any other project, ever, but they loved his concept. The movie would be a satire, but also a story about excellence, ambition, and the price of reaching the top. Flattered by their response, the director couldn't resist. He accepted, but as we'll discover later in this video, it didn't take long for him to regret it. With Frankel on board, Fox needed a script capable of blending the novel's premise with these new ideas. After several more failed attempts, the director suggested Aline Brosh McKenna. She had only written a few comedies, but she understood something key: how the professional world in New York worked. Unlike the rest of the people involved, the screenwriter wasn't afraid of Wintour. On the contrary, she loved the opportunity to write a movie starring ambitious women, but she immediately ran into obstacles. To give the script credibility, McKenna wanted to contact designers, models, and other fashion personalities, but they all refused out of fear of Anna Wintour. Through Vogue, she could blacklist names so they would never work again. The screenwriter was only able to speak with someone who didn't authorize her to reveal their identity, although their words were decisive for the script's adaptation. In secret, the anonymous advisor told her, "The people in your movie are too nice. No one in that that world is too nice. They don't have to be, nor do they have the time to be. With that in mind, McKenna hardened the characters. Within a few weeks, the first draft was ready. Frankel loved it. Fox did too, but with one condition. Almost the entire story takes place in New York, but in the third act, part of the action must move to Paris, where Miranda and Andy take a life-changing trip. They told the director they weren't planning on allocating a very high budget, so it would be necessary to recreate the French capital in the United States. Frankel nodded in fear. Big ideas with a low budget is the last thing a director wants to hear. But he told himself he wasn't going to give up. It wasn't time for regrets just yet. As the film's development progressed, new problems emerged. In late 2003, Weisberger completed her novel, which became an instant bestseller. Now, Fox, Frankel, and McKenna could finally read the plot's ending, and they didn't like it at all. Andy confronts Miranda, quits, is hailed as a hero by the media, and gets a better job. Frankel and McKenna met with Weisberger and reached an agreement for the adaptation's alternative ending. Andy walks away from Runway, but without destroying Miranda. Because of this, the editor-in-chief, instead of crushing her, actually recommends her to another publication. That wouldn't be the last time the creative duo rejected the original author's ideas. By the end of the video, you'll find out why. For the moment, Frankel, McKenna, and Fox had Weisberger on their side, but the great unknown remained, Anna Wintour. None of the people responsible for the film had contacted her, and they didn't dare to either. Frankel knew that Ben Stiller, director and star of Zoolander, had to negotiate with her first so his film would be legitimized by the fashion world. That brought endless problems and opportunities that we already covered in our dedicated video. However, this case was very different. How would the magnate react to a film inspired by herself, where she is portrayed as a true monster? While they figured out how to handle that issue, Fox and Frankel focused on finding actors capable of withstanding the pressure that was brewing like a storm. To bring the fearsome Miranda Priestley to life, Frankel and McKenna dreamed of the same name, Meryl Streep. But Fox didn't see it that way. They considered her lacking in box office draw, and above all, not very funny. That's why they were tossing around names like Michelle Pfeiffer and Catherine Zeta-Jones. Can you imagine anyone other than Streep playing Miranda? Frankel certainly couldn't. The director insisted, and company executives contacted her agents. The response came immediately. She wasn't interested in the project. Far from giving up, Frankel explained to the executives that she would elevate the film to a level they had never imagined. In the end, Tom Rothman, the head of Fox himself, personally called Streep and arranged a meeting with Frankel and McKenna. On the day of the meeting, the director and screenwriter went over the script with Streep. She was warm and approachable, but also very firm. Ultimately, she loved the script and wanted to do the film, but she wanted Miranda to be more human. She had to be a character corrupted by absolute power, fully aware of how that affected her personal life. Frankel and McKenna agreed with everything, but they paled at her next statement. Streep had no interest in imitating Wintour. She wasn't going to mess with any woman in the industry, much less satirize her the way Zoolander did with its characters. She simply wanted to embody her position of authority within a company. Also, she knew that true power can impose fear in total silence. That's why she drew inspiration from figures like Clint Eastwood. When she worked with him on the bridges of Madison County, he dominated the set without ever raising his voice. Frankel and McKenna hesitated for a moment, but Streep joining The Devil Wears Prada worked almost like a miracle. Overnight, several designers, models, and agencies began to trust the movie. Among them was the very Prada from the title. They were certain the actress would craft her own version of a powerful boss, not a cheap parody of Wintour. The creative duo had no choice but to accept that maybe this was for the best. Mind you, the editor-in-chief of Vogue didn't say a single word publicly, and her silence still weighed heavily over the production. With the role of Miranda resolved, the next objective was to find the perfect Andy. This time, Frankel and Fox agreed on the same name, Rachel McAdams. They sent her the script and offered her a reasonable salary, but she turned it all down. The director and the studio considered other alternatives like Kate Hudson and Kirsten Dunst, but they also declined. It seemed to be an unpopular role in Hollywood. To everyone, that is, except Anne Hathaway. Today, she is an established star, but at that time, she was coming off teen comedies and was looking for mature roles. She read the script for The Devil Wears Prada and loved it. It was a story about identity, ambition, and growth. But since the team wasn't interested in her presence, she launched a fierce campaign to get the role. She managed to score a meeting with a Fox executive, and in a matter of seconds, she explained why she was perfect for the part. The answer was no, but Hathaway was far from giving up. She relentlessly called other executives, and one day, she even snuck into a different executive's office and wrote in a Zen garden on their desk, "Hire me." The actress's persistence exhausted Fox, but eventually it caught the attention of Frankel and Streep. They valued her perseverance, although they still had to see if they could actually work with her. The crucial moment arrived in late 2005 when Brokeback Mountain was released. Hathaway had a supporting role here, but Streep recognized her talent. She met with her and discovered they had fantastic chemistry. It only took one call from Streep to Rothman to request she be hired. Hathaway was jumping for joy until she heard the studio's controversial demand, and I quote, "If she wanted to be part of this movie, she had to lose weight." The actress agreed, not knowing the immense distress it would cause her for years to come. We'll get to that part. The Devil Wears Prada had its central characters. Now it was time to round out the supporting cast. To embody Emily Charlton, Miranda's senior assistant, the chosen actress was Emily Blunt, as her British accent brought a perfect mix of sophistication and humor. Just like Hathaway, Blunt received a directive from Fox to stay remarkably thin, a fact that would also affect her deeply, both on and off the screen. A far from minor role was Nate, Andy's boyfriend, a character who over time would spark serious controversy. The chosen actor was Adrien Grenier. Just 3 days before filming was set to begin, The Devil Wears Prada had its entire cast, well, almost its entire cast. Frankel and Fox still couldn't find Nigel, Miranda's art director and the hidden heart of the story. All the prospective candidates considered it a minor role. At the very last minute, the multifaceted Stanley Tucci appeared and fell in love with the script. The Devil Wears Prada was headed into production. But in this story, every solution brought a new problem, and the worst was just about to begin. Filming for The Devil Wears Prada began in October 2005, and from day one, Frankel knew he was in trouble. Fox had given him a budget of $35 million, a remarkably modest figure for a film based on a bestseller, starring Meryl Streep, and it was filmed on location in New York, the most expensive city in the world. And not only that, the studio mandated a 57-day shooting schedule, which the director considered far too tight. Even so, before cameras started rolling, he gathered his cast and crew to motivate them to tackle a titanic production full of complications and a constant unspoken pressure that wasn't written into any contract. That pressure was felt right from the start. The production had planned to filming at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Bryant Park, but for reasons no one could understand, they couldn't obtain the permits. They didn't have any luck with the modern buildings they had scouted for Miranda's apartment either. The co-op boards wouldn't even let them through the door. And we're talking about Fox here, not an indie production company. They had filmed in New York hundreds of times, and this was the first time anyone had ever shut them out like this. The difficulties didn't end there. Thanks to Streep, many designers and brands had agreed to lend their clothes and accessories to the production. But when Frankel asked them to actually appear on camera, they flatly refused. Frankel had no doubts. Everyone was terrified of Anna Wintour, from location managers to top industry figures. But then, how do you make a movie about the fashion world without fashion? Frankel found his answer in production designer Jess Gonchor and costume designer Patricia Field. During pre-production, Gonchor couldn't get authorization to tour the Vogue offices, but that didn't stop him. Like a true spy, he sneaked into the Vogue editorial department, scoped out Wintour's actual office, and memorized every single detail so he could later recreate it meticulously on a soundstage. Frankel was thrilled by Gonchor's bravery. They no longer needed specific locations, at least not for the runway offices, but there was still the issue of the wardrobe that no one wanted to provide. He talked extensively with Field, with whom he had worked on Sex and the City. She was beloved by designers and fashion houses, so she convinced them to lend her garments and other items. In a few weeks, she gathered 150 pieces from brands like Donna Karan. That's how they achieved a luxurious aesthetic without having actual access to that luxury. Field also faced another major challenge, making sure Streep didn't look like Wintour. For starters, they had to avoid the Vogue editor's signature bob hairstyle. The actress wanted to use white hair, but Fox initially opposed it, thinking it would make her look too old. Streep insisted and presented two specific references: the model and actress Carmen de la Refis and Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank. Field and the makeup artist helped her finalize a unique look that wouldn't draw Wintour's attention. Frankel had found two loyal allies in Gonchor and Field, but he still had to resolve the rest of the locations. For Miranda's residence, he convinced a producer to borrow a 5-story townhouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side from a friend. Then he managed to film in places entirely disconnected from the fashion industry, where they could get permits without Wintour's interference, such as the exterior of the Museum of Natural History. Although he didn't lose sight of any aspect of the production, Frankel kept a close eye on the cast, who were also dealing with their own pressures. Hathaway quickly understood she was no longer in a teen production. She was demanding of herself and had fully immersed herself in Andy, but she began to feel overwhelmed. Following Fox's directives, she and Blunt went on a strict diet. They had to eat little more than salads to maintain their thinness. To make matters worse, they were making a movie about the fashion world, where stylized models were constantly coming and going. When no one was watching, the actresses would hug each other and cry. They couldn't do anything about it. It was the biggest opportunity of their careers, and they got to work with their idol, Meryl Streep. But the legendary actress was dealing with her own conflicts too. She discovered that Miranda was her most challenging role yet, and she was determined to rise to the occasion. She wasn't a method actress, but this time she decided to use the technique. On the first day of filming, she arrived entirely in character, looking at everyone with disdain. The director thought she had been possessed by Wintour, but he liked that feeling and knew how to harness it every single day to get the best takes. Streep's method benefited the film, but not her. After finishing each scene, she would lock herself in her trailer. If she wanted to be credible as the authority of Runway, she also had to remain isolated from the rest of the cast. But she would hear the others laughing and relaxing during downtime, and it depressed her. At the end of each day, she told herself that this must be the price one pays for being the boss. Out of the 57 days of filming, she only allowed herself to break character once. One night, she found Hathaway crying in a room, sick of the diet she had to follow. Moved, Streep went to comfort her. She told her she was beautiful, just like when they first met, and advised her to ignore the executives. More seriously than jokingly, she ordered her to eat a burger. Hathaway felt supported, but she didn't stop suffering during the shoot. Remember, she was only 22 years old and wasn't yet accustomed to the dark side of Hollywood. The weight issue was also overwhelming for Blunt, though she found support from Tucci. The actor told her not to listen to Fox and made her laugh with his jokes, even though he was facing a challenge of his own. Having joined just 3 days before filming began, he had to build his character on the fly. Beyond the main cast, Grenier started to notice that something wasn't right with his character. He realized it while filming the scene where Andy arrives late to Nate's birthday. Even though she brings him a gift and apologizes, he treats her with disdain. There were also other moments where his immaturity was clear, but he believed he would be redeemed by the alternative ending prepared by McKenna, where Nate and Andy reconcile. But nothing would turn out as he expected. In December 2005, after 6 stressful weeks for everyone, the filming of The Devil Wears Prada concluded. Frankel was exhausted, but not satisfied. He reread the third act of the script and told McKenna that it was absolutely necessary to film in Paris. She agreed, although she knew Fox had decided to recreate those scenes on US soil. She even told him that the executives had asked her to scrap entire sequences to cut costs. But the director wasn't used to giving up. He rushed to the editing room, put together a sizzle reel with the most outstanding moments, and presented it to the executives. Seeing that everyone was impressed, he requested a few extra days to film in Paris. The Fox authorities agreed, but they would only allocate enough extra budget for 2 days in the French city. Then, the original figure of $35 million rose to $41 million. After getting his scenes in Paris, Frankel completed post-production. He had plenty of material at his disposal, but he discovered that most of the scenes hindered the rhythm and the focus of the story, the relationship between Miranda and Andy. Because of this, he scrapped the happy ending between Andy and Nate, changing it to a bitter conversation in a restaurant. This was a decision that cemented a long-standing controversy. After months of work and anxiety, The Devil Wears Prada was ready. Now everyone would be able to see it, including Anna Wintour. What would the magnate think of the movie? No one on the team had dared to contact her. Throughout the entire process, her presence had been invisible but constant. She had conditioned decisions, closed doors, and set limits without ever even appearing. And now everyone had to face the true test. The moment of truth arrived on May 23, 2006 at the Paris Theater in New York. That night was the film's premiere, which served as a magnet for all of Hollywood. Streep, Hathaway, Blunt, and Tucci monopolized the camera flashes. Off to the side, Frankel, McKenna, and the Fox executives answered questions from a few journalists. But behind the smiles and good spirits, everyone responsible for the film was incredibly tense. Fox had invited Anna Wintour. And just minutes before the screening began, the head of Vogue walked across the theater dressed head to toe in Prada, just like Miranda. It was a gesture that Frankel and McKenna interpreted as defiant. The fearsome woman arrived with her daughter, Bea Schaffer, and they both sat just a few rows in front of the director and the screenwriter. When the projection started, Frankel and McKenna didn't look at the screen. They stared at the back of Wintour's head. And they weren't the only ones. They noticed that everyone else in the theater was paying attention to her as well. Frankel even caught the cast constantly turning their heads to spy on her. The director and the screenwriter expected the worst. They truly believed she would walk out of the theater at any moment, enraged, and that she would condemn the film and its creators on the cover of Vogue. But the movie ended, and she was still sitting there while the rest of the audience applauded. When her daughter leaned in toward her, Frankel paid close attention and caught what she whispered in her ear, "They got you." A few minutes later, the director and everyone responsible for The Devil Wears Prada watched Wintour slip away into the crowd without speaking to anyone. Some acquaintances later clarified to Frankel that the Vogue editor had actually liked the movie, especially Streep's performance, but that was it, nothing more. Wintour's apparent thumbs up was just the preamble to the cultural impact The Devil Wears Prada caused when it premiered on June 30th, 2006. Critics and audiences alike were captivated by the plot, the fashion satire, and the characters. Miranda in particular generated a unique magnetism, no matter how harsh and demanding she could be. The film grossed $326 million worldwide, and remember, It had ended up costing just $41 million. The success also immensely benefited its creators. Frankel gained access to more and better projects. McKenna was able to write more movies featuring empowered women. Hathaway gained access to roles that turned her into a massive star, and she was no longer subjected to drastic aesthetic demands. Blunt became one of the most appreciated and sought-after actresses in the industry. She even strengthened her friendship with Tucci when she introduced him to her sister, whom he eventually married. As for Streep, she proved she could still surprise audiences, garnering a whole new generation of fans. What's more, her portrayal of Miranda earned her yet another Oscar nomination. The Devil Wears Prada had told a story inspired by a real, powerful, and feared figure, and it had come out entirely intact with a great deal of luck. The idea of a sequel made studio executives drool and thrilled the fans, but the film's creators weren't quite as excited. The first to take the initiative was the one who started it all, Lauren Weisberger. In 2013, she published the sequel to her novel, Devil Wears Prada, where Andy becomes a renowned journalist, though she is still traumatized by Miranda. In 2018, she published a third novel focused on Emily. In both cases, sales were high, but neither became a massive phenomenon like the first installment. Fans really only wanted to see Miranda and Andy brought to life by Streep and Hathaway, but the actresses didn't feel the same way. Streep mentioned in many interviews how miserable she had been during filming because of her method acting. As for Hathaway, she was already an established star and preferred focusing on other projects. She left the door open for a continuation, but said she would only do it if she loved the script, a common response from stars when they aren't particularly enthusiastic about a project or when they are holding out for a much higher salary. Her involvement with the topic seemed to firmly end in 2022 when she stated in an interview that she didn't think a sequel to The Devil Wears Prada was even possible. Frankel wasn't sure about signing on for a sequel either, and once again, the reason was Wintour. Shortly after the premiere, he learned that she had actually remodeled her office so that it looked exactly like the one Gonchor had designed on the soundstage. He thought everything was perfectly fine then. But 2 years after the release, at a tennis tournament in Miami, he saw her sitting directly in front of him. When the match ended, he offered his hand and she shook it. But the moment he said, "I'm David Frankel, the director of The Devil Wears Prada," the Vogue boss snatched her hand back. Frankel never quite recovered from that icy encounter. The possibility of a sequel also faltered when Fox was acquired by Walt Disney Studios, which was finalized in 2019. The new parent company began discarding several projects and ideas that the previous management might have developed. Given this highly uncertain outlook, how did The Devil Wears Prada 2 actually manage to become a reality? To begin with, Disney was highly interested in the property and saw great potential for a second part. The new executives were well aware that the latest trend in Hollywood was legacy sequels, late follow-ups to classic hits. But to recapture the magic of the first time, or at least get as close as possible, they had to reunite the original team and bring something new to the table that made the effort worthwhile. The first people Disney contacted were Frankel and McKenna. Both were still hesitant. The initial expectation was to adapt Weisberger's second novel, Devil Wears Prada, but they absolutely hated the story. Fans and critics had also torn the book apart. The creative duo flatly refused to adapt that second novel. Fortunately, the executives offered them peace of mind. If necessary, they could completely ignore the second book and build the story from scratch, continuing directly from the original film. Weisberger wasn't happy at all, but she kept quiet. She had sold her rights decades ago, and there was nothing she could do. The author understood that the cinematic universe had taken its own path, and that these versions of the characters no longer belonged to her. Or in other words, as long as audiences kept buying tickets, she would keep cashing the juicy royalty checks for having created these characters out of her own trauma. So she didn't mind if they wanted to do her the favor of improving the plot. The director and the screenwriter were thrilled with the creative freedom, but there were still other hurdles to overcome to make the sequel a reality. They wondered how they would ever convince the cast, especially Streep and Hathaway. Without them, the project was dead on arrival. Considering everything we've discussed so far, negotiations could have been a nightmare, but they were actually resolved quite quickly. The actresses trusted Frankel, McKenna, and the script they were developing, which would allow them to explore a new stage in their characters' lives and careers. And of course, unlike Fox, Disney offered them a substantial pay raise. With no more excuses left, Frankel and McKenna developed The Devil Wears Prada 2, steering completely clear of the original author's vision. They conceived a plot in which Andy crosses paths with Miranda once again. Together, they must navigate a changing landscape and deal with Emily, who is now a high-powered executive at a rival luxury conglomerate. Amidst this dynamic, the film would tackle the evolution of the fashion and magazine industries, focusing on the shift from print to digital media. With everything set, production on The Devil Wears Prada 2 finally got underway. It faced far fewer complications than the first installment, but there were still some hard moments. By late June 2025, when filming began, Frankel had plenty of reasons to be happy. Not only had Streep and Hathaway returned, but Blunt and Tucci were back as well. He was also able to add actors of Kenneth Branagh's caliber to the cast. Patricia Field returned to handle the wardrobe, and this time she didn't have to beg for borrowed clothes. Dozens of prestigious fashion houses happily offered up their gems. Furthermore, Disney had set a budget of around $100 million, a massive leap, remembering that the first part had ended up costing $41 million. There were also positive changes regarding logistics. The director now had 112 shooting days across locations in New York and various parts of Italy. While the resources were obviously better, Frankel couldn't get one thought out of his head. This time, Wintour knew exactly what they were doing. That made the pressure feel even more intense. Someone else who wasn't happy was Adrien Grenier. No one had called him to take on a leading role in the sequel. He spoke with Frankel, knowing exactly where this supposed oversight came from. For years, Nate had become the subject of fierce internet debates. Many concluded that while Miranda was a cruel boss, she actually pushed Andy to mature and grow. Her boyfriend, on the other hand, never offered her any support. Grenier argued that his character wasn't malicious, just immature and selfish, but no explanation could save him from the online vitriol and the subsequent damage to his career. What do you think about this debate? While we continue with the video, I want you to leave your thoughts in the comments. On the set of The Devil Wears Prada 2, Streep and Hathaway proved their chemistry remained completely intact, though they once again found themselves thrust into a world of thin young women and the relentless pursuit of perfection. Hathaway remembered the suffering of the past and felt the urge to cry. But unlike back then, she now had the power to bend the rules of the game. On the very first day, she went to the production team and demanded they hire normal-sized, healthy models for the runway show they were preparing for the film. The executives agreed with her and accepted the condition. Throughout all this time, Frankel, the cast, and the crew tried not to think about Wintour, but no one could avoid what happened on September 27, 2025, when the production moved to a Dolce & Gabbana fashion show. The team took advantage of the real chaos and energy of Fashion Week to lend authenticity to the movie. The attendees were stunned when they saw Meryl Streep arrive, fully in character as Miranda. She was accompanied by Tucci, who was also deep in character. Both took their seats right next to the runway, and as the show progressed, observed every detail with absolute precision. They weren't just being filmed for the movie, they were being watched by the entire world. Streep was proving once again that she was born to play this character until she lost her concentration. On the other side of the runway, she spotted Anna Wintour. Streep and Tucci looked at the Vogue editor in surprise, and even the models themselves turned their heads to see what was happening. Everyone at the event wondered if they would come face to face. When the show ended, Streep and Wintour made their way through the crowd, locked eyes, and greeted each other with genuine smiles. They even stood there chatting in front of the cameras and everyone around them. The images quickly hit social media, igniting a frenzy among fans and sending the hype into the stratosphere. It was the event of the century. Fans of the movie and fashion world alike had waited over 20 years to see that spectacle. But Frankel and McKenna remained highly cautious. They still didn't know if that friendly greeting was a sign of peace or a warning. Whatever that interaction meant, filming on The Devil Wears Prada 2 finally wrapped. Frankel was able to complete post-production in peace, but by early 2026, the ghosts of the past returned to haunt him. Wintour might have a soft spot for Streep, and she even proved she could share a comedy sketch with Hathaway at the Oscars. But that didn't guarantee a happy ending for the sequel. Not after what happened at that tennis tournament in Miami. The Devil Wears Prada was born as a catharsis, but evolved into a phenomenon fraught with difficulties. It remains a film about power, ambition, and ultimately fear. Just like Andy did with Miranda, Hollywood learned a valuable lesson from Anna Wintour. Excellence demands sacrifices, and some figures, even off camera, have the power to define an entire story. What happened behind the scenes of The Twilight Zone was literally illegal. 3 people died.